paradrama tales.
My husband told me, she's everything you used to be, and I felt my world fracture. 8 years of marriage. A child on the way, and he tossed it all away, chasing a younger version of my past. How do you rebuild when your own husband strips you bare? I never imagined the day I'd uncover a secret life hidden beneath our shared routines. But there I was, staring at a text thread that painted a 2-year portrait of betrayal. It began when I was 6 months pregnant, the morning sickness and exhaustion stealing my desire for intimacy. I thought my husband simply understood, lending a gentle hand as I curled up on the couch. Instead, he slipped away into darkness. The first revelation stunned me. He had met a stranger one night on impulse, carried home the thrill of anonymity, and betrayed our vows with someone who didn't even know my name. My heart pounded as I recalled how he always hid his phone for privacy, and now I saw why. But the stranger was only the beginning. As I scrolled further, I discovered a second woman, someone he'd known for years, a college student barely out of her teens who had become his clandestine friends with benefits for nearly a full year. Their messages dripped with longing and photographs exchanged in secret hours, a private world built on convenience and desire, parallel to the family life I painstakingly nurtured. My wedding band felt suddenly like a shackle. I traced every cheery, "How was your day?" I'd sent, recalling the number of times I'd asked him to Google baby names, only to learn that I was sharing his life with another woman's laughter. The timeline spread out on my screen like a map of unfamiliar territory anniversary dinners, punctuated by midnight rendezvous vacations, punctured by stolen messages. Sunday services concluded with hidden goodbyes. I realized the affair had begun just 3 months after our wedding anniversary, a silent stain on what I believed was a year of renewed commitment. Each date stamp drilled deeper into my soul: October 12th, 2022, March 5th, 2023, July 19th, 2023, markers of his divided loyalties. It wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern, an on-again, off-again rebellion against the life we built together. My hands shook as I forwarded the threads to my own email, preserving every word. I thought I'd wake from this nightmare, that it couldn't be real, but it was. In 2 years, he'd carved out spaces for infidelity, treating our home like an empty shell, his promises like paper dissolving in a rain. And in that raw moment, I understood that to rebuild my self-worth, I first had to strip away every lie he hid behind. Only then could I reclaim the woman he tried to rewrite. When I pressed him for the truth, his answer scorched through me like acid. "She doesn't nag me. She doesn't argue. She's simple." His words tumbled out with cold precision, each one a deliberate stab. "She's beautiful, not fat or lazy. She reminds me of you 15 years ago, before you became complicated." I sat frozen on the edge of our bed, the afternoon light pooling around us, and felt my heart splinter. 18 years of marriage, whole years filled with dreams, compromises, diaper changes, and late-night heartbeats boiled down to a laundry list of my flaws. He cataloged every moment I'd asked for help, every thoughtful concern I'd voiced, as though my love had become an annoyance. I remembered the countless times I'd stayed up organizing his work travel, or soothed our toddler's fever, believing those acts were the language of devotion. To him, they had become the evidence of my nagging. I thought of the nights I lay awake worrying about our mortgage and our future, convinced I was protecting us, only to realize he saw me as a source of trouble instead of a partner. My mind raced, trying to salvage something from his litany of complaints. Was there a version of me I could become again? But the cruelty of his explanation was that it didn't call for change. It justified his betrayal. He wasn't wrestling with guilt. He was praising someone else for being everything I supposedly no longer was. The conversation turned surreal when he described how effortlessly she slipped into his life. Spontaneous text threads instead of schedules. Laughter without critique. Intimacy without expectations. I grasped for the woman he painted, the woman he'd fled to, but all I found was a hollow echo of my past self. In that moment, I realized his affair wasn't about passion, so much as convenience, a retreat into a world where love came without work, without honesty, without the messy truth of real life. I felt rage surge, but also a fierce clarity. I would not be rewritten into a silent shadow of who I once was. His words meant to diminish me instead became my catalyst. I stood, voice trembling but unyielding, and told him that if simplicity was his desire, he could have it in a life without me, because complexity, debate, and growth were the truest measures of love I would ever know. I stare at my reflection and barely recognize the woman staring back, wrinkles around my eyes that weren't there 15 years ago, a softness in my waistline that speaks of motherhood, nights spent soothing children instead of dancing under neon lights. And yet, he tells me he's chasing a younger me, a memory frozen in time, when my laughter was effortless and my body was untouched by stretch marks. It hits me like a punch. He's not in love with the woman next to him, but with a ghost of who I used to be. Nostalgia can be intoxicating, a warm haze that blurs imperfections and glorifies the past. But nostalgia is a mirage, and chasing it means loving a dream, not a reality. I remember how we met late 90s jeans mixtapes, endless all-nighters fueled by the thrill of the new. And yes, I was carefree then. But life changed me. I learned responsibility. I grew through hardship. I found depth and empathy. That growth he calls complication is the very thing that built our family, that forged the person I am today. He craves simplicity and spontaneity, qualities I embodied when our biggest worry was prom dress colors, but he ignores the cost. A version of me who needed no commitments, no compromises, no heart to nurse back from heartbreak. He seeks that simpler me, like a balm for midlife pain, a cure for wrinkles and bills and toddler tantrums, but at the price of abandoning the person who stood by him through job losses, illnesses, and sleepless nights. That younger you he chases is a photograph in a dusty album, perfect only because it's paused at the happiest moment and stripped of every struggle that followed. Chasing that fantasy is a betrayal, not just of me, but of the life we built together, our home, our memories, our child. I realize now that true love doesn't worship the past. It embraces evolution, the messy beauty of change. I refuse to shrink back into yesterday's silhouette so he can feel comfortable again. I will not let my worth be defined by years or by the smoothness of my skin. The danger of this illusion is clear. If he continues to pursue a younger me, he'll never be satisfied, always chasing something unreachable until he loses sight of the treasure he's had all along. And so, I step away from that reflection, not with regret, but with fierce pride in the woman I am, now exquisitely complex, deeply loved by those who matter, and absolutely unrepentant for every line life has etched on my face. I woke up the morning after his confession, feeling unmoored, as though someone had yanked the rug of my identity right out from under me. His words, "You're too complicated. You nag. You're not fun anymore," played on a loop in my head, each syllable a fresh cut. I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror, willing the reflection to offer reassurance, but all I saw was a stranger's face etched with doubt. How had the woman I loved and who loved me so deeply become fat, lazy, annoying? Every task I'd taken pride in, planning our family's meals, organizing birthday parties, juggling work and motherhood, suddenly felt like proof of the flaws he'd cataloged. When I folded laundry, I heard him say she doesn't nag me. When I cooked dinner, I felt him dismiss it as lazy. When I voiced a worry about our bills, I felt the sting of being complicated. His betrayal was one thing, but his explanation weaponized every sincere effort I'd made. I began questioning whether the countless nights I'd stayed up comforting him were just opportunities he resented. By afternoon, my confidence had evaporated. I caught myself Googling signs of a broken marriage and how to know you're not enough. The blank page reflecting my racing thoughts back at me, a single comment from a coworker. "You look tired today," felt like a verdict. I wanted to shrink, to disappear into the background, so I wouldn't have to face his cruelty again. And yet, as the walls closed in, I recognized the absurdity of letting one person's bitterness redefine decades of my life. I recalled who I was, before nag and lazy, a bright-eyed college student chasing dreams, a newlywed laughing at midnight jokes, a doting mom whose sons, "I love you." Mama still rings sweeter than any accolade. Those memories surged through me, a counterpoint to his criticism. I realized that words can wound deeper than any act of infidelity. They plant seeds of shame that, if left unchecked, can grow into self-hate. But words can also be repurposed as fuel for change. In that moment, I resolved not to vanish into his narrative of me. I would chart my own course back to self-worth, piece by piece. His description of me would be the pebble beneath my boot, something to step on, but not something to carry. As I rinsed my face and met my own gaze, I made a silent vow I would rebuild from within, anchored by the truths I knew in my heart, not by the fleeting judgments of someone who had allowed himself to look elsewhere. That crisis of identity would become the crucible in which I forged a stronger, truer self, one that no betrayal or cruel comparison could ever erase. It was late one sleepless night, my third in a row of tossing and turning, when I realized something had to change. I could no longer let my husband's cruel words define who I was. So, I reached for my journal, that old friend I'd abandoned when life got busy, and began to write, not about his betrayal, but about me, the strengths I'd carried through 8 years of marriage, the kindness I still held in my heart, the dreams I once chased with reckless abandon. That simple act of putting ink to page felt like taking the first step out of a dark tunnel. Over the next week, I built a self-care routine, like I would a house brick by brick, choosing only the sturdiest materials. Each morning, I poured a mug of coffee strong enough to chase away the remnants of midnight tears, then spent 10 unhurried minutes stretching to loosen the knots in my shoulders and reclaim the energy I'd forgotten I had. I scheduled a therapy appointment, my first outside help in years, because I recognized that professional guidance could help me untangle the shame and self-doubt his words had sown. In our first session, I practiced speaking aloud the truths I'd long kept silent, that I was neither lazy nor annoying, but a woman who worked tirelessly for her family. I rediscovered small joys, an old guitar gathering dust in the corner, the thrill of a new novel, the way sunlight streamed through the living room windows on crisp fall mornings. I carved out me time on Sundays, booking a painting class at a local studio where colored pigment replaced tears on my palette. I reconnected with friends I'd sidelined, those who'd long admired my resilience, and let them remind me of the woman they'd seen long before. Betrayal bent my spine. Each supportive text and shared laugh felt like a brick reinforcing the walls of my renewed self-esteem. At night, I practiced gratitude, listing 3 wins before sleep: the courage to confront the truth, the choice to seek help, the vitality I felt returning to my limbs. I learned that self-care wasn't selfish. It was the foundation I needed to stand tall. I set clear boundaries: no more late-night calls from him, no more excuses for missed promises. I practiced saying no to anything that threatened my peace, whether it was an unsolicited apology or an invitation to pretend everything was okay. In less than a month, the woman I saw in the mirror began to shine again. My eyes, once clouded with confusion, now sparkled with purpose. My journal became a testament to survival therapy sessions, a roadmap to healing, and each act of self-care, a declaration that I would not be defined by his betrayal. That turning point, shifting from shock to deliberate self-care, did more than soothe my wounds. It reminded me that I am the author of my own story, and no single chapter of pain can erase the narrative of strength I continue to write. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh notebook, determined to draft a blueprint for how I would move forward. No more vague "we need to talk." I needed clear, non-negotiable lines. First, I listed transparency rituals. He would share his daily schedule and check in by text if plans changed. Mini hook. No more secrets tucked behind a locked phone. When he resisted, I reminded him that trust is built on visibility, not suspicion. Next, I defined respectful communication. Any discussion about our relationship would happen face to face without shouting or blame. Mini hook. When it's my turn to speak, I deserve his full attention. I'd insist he pause his phone calls, step away from the TV, and look me in the eye before responding. This wasn't micromanaging, it was insisting on the basic courtesy a partner owes. Finally, I drafted consequences for boundary crossings. If he texted the other woman again, I would leave the house for my own safety. If he broke our transparency rule, weekend visits would be suspended until he honored it. Mini hook. Boundaries without teeth are just suggestions. I underlined each consequence in red, imagining the relief of not tiptoeing around broken promises. Illustrating each point, I remembered the night he vanished for 2 hours without explanation. My panic as I called his cell and his voicemail answered. That was when I realized I needed a rule: no unannounced absences. I envisioned his car pulling into the driveway and me greeting him calmly because I'd known exactly where he'd been. I also thought of the way our arguments spiraled when I caught him in a lie. Under the new agreement, we would pause the conversation until we could both speak calmly, no more yelling matches that left us both wounded. The goal wasn't to punish him, but to protect both of us from the chaos that had nearly destroyed our bond. By the time I finished my draft, my chest felt lighter. I had transformed my fears into structure, transparency, respect, and accountability. When I presented it to him that evening, I spoke firmly, but without anger. This is how we'll rebuild together or apart. He glanced at the notebook's highlighted lines, and I saw in his eyes the weight of what he'd lost. In defining what's acceptable now, I rediscovered my own strength. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out, but guardrails that guide us back when we stray. And I was ready to drive our marriage down a new, clearer road. I scheduled our first therapy session with trembling resolve, convinced that sitting across from a stranger would either be our salvation or the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. The moment we entered the softly lit room, chairs facing each other, tissues at the ready, I felt both exposed and oddly hopeful. Our therapist invited us to share without interruption, and I spoke first, my voice shaking as I recounted the betrayal and the cruel words he'd used to justify it. He sat quietly, gaze downcast, and when it was his turn, he confessed the boredom and guilt that drove him towards someone who felt easier. In that neutral space, neither accusation nor defensiveness was allowed. Instead, we learned to use statements. "I felt abandoned when you disappeared," I said, and he replied, "I felt relieved by her simplicity," both of us offering raw truths without judgment. As the weeks passed, therapy became our mirror and our map. We practiced active listening. I learned to hear his fear of complexity as a plea for help, and he learned to hear my pain as a call for connection rather than criticism. Our therapist taught us techniques to de-escalate fights, pausing when words heated up, using a safe word to press, pause then returning with calm voices. We identified triggers, the sight of my phone lighting up irregularly, his guilt that made him withdraw into silence, and we built mini rituals to repair those ruptures, like a 10-minute debrief at bedtime, rather than letting resentment fester overnight. Therapy also shone a light on my own needs, respect for my emotional labor, acknowledgement of my sacrifices, and permission to voice fears without being labeled complicated. I practiced setting limits in session, saying I need empathy before advice, and he practiced holding space, repeating back what he'd heard before responding. In group exercises, we mapped our shared history on a timeline, marking both joys and betrayals so that no moment was erased, but every moment could be understood. Slowly, the wall between us, built from lies and laziness, began to crack. I saw him lean forward when I described my lingering shame. He saw me soften when he admitted his regret. We even returned to the home we'd planned as a sanctuary and rediscovered the laughter hidden beneath the dust of unspoken resentments. Therapy didn't erase his affair, nor did it magically restore the simple version of me he'd once loved. Instead, it gave us tools to navigate complexity, to honor growth over nostalgia, and to rebuild trust, one honest conversation at a time. In that courageous act of truth-telling, we found a path forward, whether together or apart, anchored in the knowledge that real intimacy blooms only when we dare to reveal every jagged edge of our true selves. I realized that healing isn't a once-and-done event, but a tapestry woven from countless moments of joy reclaimed. One crisp Saturday morning, I packed my suitcase and drove to the mountains, just me, my favorite playlist, and the open road. With each mile, the weight of betrayal lifted, replaced by an intoxicating sense of freedom. I stopped at a roadside overlook, the valley unfolding beneath me like a promise, and breathed deeply, tasting the sweetness of possibility for the first time in months. Back home, I dusted off my paintbrushes, tools I hadn't touched since before wedding planning, consumed my weekends, and turned a blank canvas into shades of sunrise. Each stroke was a rebellion against despair, a bold declaration that color still existed in my life. I hung the finished piece in my bedroom, where its vibrant warmth greeted me each morning and reminded me that I could create beauty from darkness. I reconnected with old friends over Friday night potlucks, laughter spilling as we cooked together, sharing stories that had nothing to do with heartbreak. When one friend surprised me with tickets to a jazz club, I hesitated. Could I really step into that smoky room alone? But I went and found myself swaying to the saxophone's sultry notes, heart fluttering with delight instead of dread. On Sunday evenings, I began a new ritual: solo baths scented with lavender, a glass of wine, and a novel that whisked me to far-off places. I let my phone rest silent on the counter, and in those uninterrupted hours, I rediscovered the quiet joy of being fully present with myself. I even tried dance cardio classes, stumbling at first, but soon laughing through the missteps as endorphins chased away the ghosts of his criticism. Each small triumph sending a just, because bouquet to a friend volunteering at the local food bank, planting heirloom tomatoes in my backyard, became proof that my life was more than his betrayal. I marked these milestones in my journal: day 1 of the road trip, day 5 of painting sunrises, day 10 of solo jazz nights. With every entry, I felt my spirit grow stronger. Reclaiming joy didn't erase the past, but it reframed it. I learned that self-love isn't selfish. It's the foundation upon which every healthy relationship must be built, even the one with myself. And as I watched the sunset from my porch one evening, its golden light cast long shadows that whispered of both endings and new beginnings. I knew I was ready to embrace life beyond betrayal, vibrant, unafraid, and utterly in love with the woman I'd become. In the end, I discovered that my greatest triumph wasn't convincing him to stay or forcing him to face his mistakes. It was learning to stand tall on my own 2 feet, fiercely proud of the woman I've become. I traded guilt for gratitude, shame for self-respect. And every morning now begins not with dread, but with a promise to nurture my own heart before bending it toward anyone else's. Rebuilding my life meant more than healing from betrayal. It meant embracing joy in solo road trips, the thrill of creating art that speaks my truth, and the laughter of friends who remind me I'm never alone. It meant turning down the volume on his cruel words and turning up the soundtrack of my own courage. If you've ever felt flattened by someone else's shortcomings, or if you're learning to reclaim your worth after being told you're too much, know that your story isn't over. You are the author of the next chapter. Share your experience in the comments below to remind others that resilience lives in every one of us. Subscribe to join our community of survivors who refuse to be defined by betrayal, and hit the bell, so you won't miss our next episode on setting boundaries that protect your peace. Remember, true love begins with the respect you give yourself, and once you choose that, no one else's choices can ever knock you off your path again.